Hey folks, welcome back. This is part 2 of the rapid turnaround spacecraft tutorial. In the first episode, we made this spacecraft using hard surface modelling and the discombobulator add-on that comes shipped with Blender. In this episode, I'm going to show you how to make a procedural asteroid field. So we're going to be using procedural modelling, we're going to be using procedural materials, and we're going to be using geometry nodes to generate the particles. Without further ado, let's get to it. So open up your project from last time. You should have a spacecraft similar to this, or you may have modelled your own version. So the first thing we'll do is we're going to select the empty object, which is controlling the spacecraft. We'll navigate over to our object data over here, and on frame 1, I'm going to take my cursor over the X location. I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose clear keyframes. Now, if I push play, there'll be no movement at all. Excellent. Before we move on, we should do a bit of housekeeping. So I'm going to take my cursor over to the top right into the outliner, and I'm going to expand the empty controller. I'm going to rename some of these objects here. I'll drag this over to here just so you can see my naming convention. I have got an extra object here, this one. So from the last tutorial, we didn't discombobulate this, but I decided to discombobulate this mesh here on the outer faces. So if you haven't got that and you want to add that detail, feel free to do that. It's easy enough. Just tab into edit mode, select the faces you want to discombobulate, and then Shift A, and then just choose discombobulator. I've already done that. In fact, I might select this discombobulated mesh, Shift select this mesh, and I'm going to hit Control J just to join that so it's one object. So for this first cylinder, I'm going to rename this to center cylinder. For these cylinders, I'm going to rename to center cylinders. For this object, I'm going to rename to struts. I'm going to rename the discombobulated mesh to Sci-Fi panels. I'll keep the name for the DSX space loop, which was this, and I'll keep the name for the DSX space mesh, which was this. In my outliner, I'm going to select the struts. I'll then hold down Control, hold down Shift, and select the top object underneath the empty controller. I'll then Shift select the empty controller, and in my 3D viewport, I'm going to hit M for move. I'll then click Add Collection, and I'll rename this to Spacecraft. I'll hit Enter. I'll then click this arrow, and that will move all those objects into its own collection. Excellent. I'm going to mute that collection. I'm going to hit numpad 1 to go into front view. Now we're going to model some procedural asteroids. So I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go to Mesh, and I'm going to choose Cube. I'm going to hit numpad period, and that will zoom into that object. I'm going to take my cursor over to the spanner icon over here, which is our modifiers. Let's just increase this window. Now to add a subdivision surface, we can either go Add Modifier, we go to Generate, and Subdivision Surface, or we can hit Control 1, and that will add a subdivision surface at level 1. If I delete that and hit Control 2, that will add a subdivision surface at level 2. It's a good shortcut, but we're going to keep it at level 1. I'll then click this button here. I'm going to click Apply. I'm going to take my cursor over to the outliner, and I'm going to rename that cube to Asteroid. I'll duplicate this 4 times, so we're going to have 5 asteroids in total. I do recommend making more, but I'm just going to make 5 for this tutorial. Feel free to make as many as you like. The more you've got, the better your scene will look. So I'm going to hit Shift E, X, hold down Control, snap it to the grid. Shift E, X, hold down Control, snap it to the grid. Shift left click, select this one. Shift E, X, hold down Control, snap it to the grid. I'll then select this asteroid here. I'm going to hit numpad period to zoom into that object. I'll then tab into edit mode. I'm going to hit number 1 for vertices select. I'll then right click, and I'm going to choose randomize vertices. And with the menu options down here in the bottom left, I'm going to increase this to maybe something around about there. Maybe I'll hit SZ, hold down Control, snap it to the grid to around about there. I'll tab out of edit mode. I'll left click select this one. I'm going to tab into edit mode. Make sure you've got all the vertices selected. I'll right click, and I'm going to choose randomize vertices. I'm going to change the amount to something around about there. Change the seed to something random. I'll hit SX, hold down Control to around about there. Excellent. I'll tab out of edit mode. I'll select this one, tab into edit mode, right click, choose randomize vertices. We'll increase the amount, and I'm going to change the random seed, something around about there. Maybe I'll hit SY, hold down Control, snap it to the grid so it's around about there. I'll then tab out of edit mode, hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'm going to select this one here, tab into edit mode, right click, randomize vertices, increase the amount, change the seed, something around about there. Maybe I'll hit S, Shift Z, and that will scale it up on every axis, excluding the Z axis. And I'm going to scale it to round about there. I'll then tab out of edit mode. We'll select this one, tab into edit mode, right click, randomize vertices, increase the amount. I'm going to go for something around about there. Maybe I'll change the random seed. Yep, I'll be happy with that. Maybe I can scale it up. So I'm going to hit S, hold down Control, snap it to the grid. So around about there. Excellent. Let's give these a bit more detail now. I'll hold down shift, left click, select this one, left click, select this one, left click and left click. I'll then right click and I'll click shade smooth. I'll select this first one. I'm going to click add modifier. We'll go to generate and I'm going to choose subdivision surface. I'm going to set the levels for the viewport to 3, but I'll set the render levels to, let's say, 4. I'll then click add modifier. We go to deform and I'm going to choose displace. I'll then click new. I'll then click this button here and that will take us to the texture slot, which is down here. I'm going to change it from image or movie to clouds, and I'm going to change the scale to, let's say, 2. Maybe I'll change the type to hard. I'll then go over to my modifiers over here. I'm going to hit shift A. I'm going to go to empty and I'm going to choose sphere. Let's just rename that sphere. So in your outliner over here, I'm going to rename the empty to displace empty. I'll then select this asteroid, and over here on your displacement modifier we're going to change the coordinate system from local to object, and that object will be the displacement empty. So find displacement empty. So now if we select the displacement empty and hit G, you can see the displacement is now mapped to this empty object. I'll then reselect this asteroid. I'll go to the displacement modifier and I'm going to change the strength from 1 to 0.75. We'll add another displacement modifier. So I'm going to go add modifier. We go to deform and we're going to choose displace. I'm going to click new on that displacement modifier. We'll change the coordinate system from local to object, and that object will be the displacement empty. I'll then click this button here, which will take us to the texture slot. This is a new texture. So if we click this button here, you can see that's the original texture, and texture.001 is the new texture. So just ensure you've got texture.001 selected, and we're going to change the size to, let's say, 0.5. And that will give it a finer level of detail. I then go back to my modifiers, and on the bottom displacement, I'm going to change the strength from 1 to 0.25. I'll then take my cursor over to the 3D viewport. I'm going to right click and select shade auto smooth. And what that's done, it's added a smooth by angle modifier over here. And I'm going to change the angle to 60 degrees. Fortunately, we don't have to add the modifiers onto these asteroids one by one. I can just left click select this one, shift left click select, shift select, and last but not least, shift select this one. So the one with all the active modifiers is the last one you select. We'll then hit Control L and we'll choose copy modifiers. So now they've all got those modifiers. Excellent. Let's just check that all the settings are the same. Yep, brilliant. Now we need to add a material to all these asteroids. That's easy enough. So if you haven't got a window open, let me just collapse this window quick. So to open up the shader editor, I'm just going to take my cursor to the bottom left until I see a crosshair. I'll then left click and drag, and that'll open up a new window. I'll then change it from 3D viewport to shader editor. And with this asteroid selected, I'm going to click new. We'll rename the material to asteroid. I'll just hit N to hide the N panel. I'll increase this window so we can see what we're doing. I'm going to hit numpad 1, numpad period, just to zoom into that object. I'll box select these. I'm going to hit G, just drag these across to give us a bit more room. I'm just going to give this a base color for now, just so we can see what we're doing in the viewport. I'm going to make it kind of a blue color, and I'll turn it down to around about there. Okay, I'm going to select this object, shift select this one, this one, this one, and last but not least, shift select this one. I'll then hit Control L and we're going to choose link materials. So now they've all got the same material, and with all these selected, I'm going to hit numpad period, and that will center the camera to the median point of all the selected objects. So for the first part of this material, I'm going to add an AO detailing mask, which will bring out the crevices and the cracks. So in the shader editor, I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go to input, and I'm going to choose geometry. I'll then hit Shift A, go to input, and we'll choose ambient occlusion. Shift A, I'm going to go to converter, and I'm going to choose color ramp. Shift A, color, and we're going to choose mix color. For socket A, we're going to turn this to bright white, and socket B, we'll turn it to black. Select the mix color node. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate, and I'll pop it over to here. For this first color, I'm going to change to like a bluish tone, maybe something around about there. I'll then hover my cursor over that color. I'm going to hit Control C, and that will copy that color. And then I'll hover my cursor over socket B and hit Control V. That will paste that color. I'll then select that color, and I'm just going to darken it down to maybe around about there. I'll plug the result from this mix color node into the base color. I'll plug the result from this mix color node into the factor. I'll plug the color from the color ramp into the factor of this mix color. I'll then plug the color socket from the ambient occlusion into the color ramp, and finally I'll plug the normal socket from the geometry node into the normal socket of the ambient occlusion. I'm going to select only local, and now if I drag this black flag on the color ramp, we should start seeing some details appear. So just drag these across until all your crevices are kind of been exposed. Don't worry about the shading issues, because when we increase the subdivision surface, so if I go onto this one for example and I'll increase the subdivision surface, you can see more and more of the details disappear. In fact, just to ensure that it doesn't glitch out on the render, let's just take this back down to 3. I'm going to make sure that my subdivision on each of these for the render is set to 5. So I'll select this one, set it to 5, select this one, I'm going to set it to 5. We'll select this one, we'll do the same for here, and do the same for these two here. Excellent. I'll just neaten up these nodes quick. I'll then hold down Control, right click and drag, and that will disconnect the mix color from the principal BSDF. And now we're going to work on the second part of the material. Shift A, input, and we'll choose texture coordinate. Shift A, we'll go to vector, and we're going to choose mapping. Shift A, we'll go to texture, and we'll choose noise texture. Shift A, we'll go to converter, and we choose color ramp. Shift A, we go to color, and we're going to choose mix color. I'm going to hold down Shift and left click select all of these nodes. I'm going to hit G, just bring them across to round about there. And on the texture coordinate node, I'm going to take the generated socket and plug it into the top socket of the mapping node, and the vector socket on the mapping node, I'm going to plug into the vector of the noise texture. I'll then plug the factor from the noise texture into the color ramp, and the color from the color ramp into the mix factor of the mix color node. I'll change my noise texture from 3D to 4D. I'm going to keep the scale set to 5, but maybe I'll increase the detail to maximum, which is 15. I'll also increase the roughness to, let's say, 0.75. Maybe we can give it a bit of distortion, so I'm going to set this to 1. I'll then plug the result from the mix color node into the base color of the principal BSDF. And just for now, I'm going to copy these two colors and paste them into these sockets here. So on socket A for this mix color, I'm going to hit Control C. I'll then hit Control V and paste it into there. And then on this color swatch, I'm going to hit Control C, and then I'll hit Control V and paste it into there. Now we can drag these flags to crunch in the colors. Maybe something around there. I'll just change the color of these as well. So we're going to change the hue slightly. Maybe I'll bring it on the orange side, kind of like iron. I'll then hit Control C, Control V, and we'll darken this color up to around about there. Now we need to mix these two together, so I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go to color, and we'll choose mix color, and I'll pop that in between this mix color node and the principal BSDF, and I'll plug the result from this mix color node into socket B. So now we can switch between the two, or we can use another noise texture to drive this mix factor, which is exactly what we're going to do. So I'll just drag this down. Maybe I'll neaten these nodes up quick. So I'll box select these nodes, drag these down, so I'm going to hit G, we'll drag them down to around about there. I'll then box select these nodes here. I'm going to hit Shift D, and we'll drag these down to here. We'll change the W factor, and maybe I'll change the scale to, let's say, 7. Let's see what that does. I'll then plug the color from this color ramp into the mix factor of the mix color node. We'll just drag these flags so we've got something to our taste. Maybe something around there. Okay, I'm not really happy with the blue color, so I'm going to tone that down a bit. I'm going to take the color down, and I'll take the saturation down. I'll also take the colour down on this one and take the saturation down slightly. I want to drive the roughness and the bump with the result of this mix colour node, but the roughness is black and white values, so black is 0 and white is 1. So white, which is 1, would be 100% rough, and black, which is 0, would be 100% reflective. So in order to plug this into the roughness, we need to add a math node to normalize it. So I'll hit Shift A, we'll go to converter, and we'll choose math node, and I'll pop that in between the result of the mix color and the roughness, and we're going to change this to multiply. And essentially what that's done, it's converted it into a black and white image. Let's just view that to show you what I mean. So I'm going to hit Control, Shift, and left click select the multiply node, and as you can see, it's created a black and white map. I want to have a bit more control of this black and white map, so I'm going to add a color ramp before it goes into the roughness. So let's just reconnect the principal BSDF into the surface. I'll then hit Shift A, we'll go to converter, and we'll choose color ramp, and I'll pop that in between there. As you can see, it's really shiny, so I'm going to take this black value and I'm going to bring it up to, let's say, around about 0.333, and then I'll drag this white flag all the way back to around about there perhaps, and I'll drag this one across to there. So you've got a bit of shine and a bit of rough. Excellent. Now we'll take the value from this math node and we're going to use it to drive a bump map. So I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go to vector, and I'll choose bump. I'll then plug the value from the multiply node into the height of the bump node, and the normal from the bump node into the normal of the principal BSDF. Okay, maybe I can turn the distance up to, let's say, 2. We'll just increase it. Coming through quite well. Still a bit shiny for my liking, so I'm going to take this grey factor here and I'm going to increase it slightly to maybe, let's say, 0.5. Just going to drag this down so we can clearly see where it's going. Neaten up these nodes. So I'll just hit Control Space, and that'll give you a preview of the nodes. Hit Control Space, and that'll enter full screen. Okay, excellent. I'll take my cursor over to my outliner. I'm going to select the first asteroid. I'll hold down Control, Shift, and select the last asteroid. I'll also hold down Shift and left click, select the displacement empty. I'm going to hit M for move. I'm going to click Add Collection, and we'll rename this collection to Asteroids. I'll then click this arrow button, and that will move all the asteroids into the asteroid collection over here. Excellent. So you've got two collections now. Got the asteroids and the spacecraft. I'll then select the first collection. I'm going to select my camera, and now we're going to make a geometry node system to distribute our asteroids. So I'm going to navigate the cursor into the shader editor, and I'll click this icon here, and I'm going to change it from shader editor to geometry node editor. I'll then navigate into the 3D viewport. I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to go mesh, and I'm going to choose cube. Just make sure that this cube is in your collection or scene collection. It can't be in your spacecraft or asteroid collections. And we'll rename this to Asteroid Field Generator. I'll then navigate to my Geometry Nodes window. I'm going to click New, and we'll rename this Geometry Node setup to Asteroid Field Generator. I'll increase this window. I'm going to zoom in to the cube. I'll zoom in over here. Maybe we'll give us a bit of breathing space. The principle behind this is we're going to generate loads of points inside this cube, and we're going to instance our asteroids on each of the points. And to do that, the first thing we need to do is hit Shift A, we go to Mesh, and we'll go Operations, and we'll choose Mesh to Volume. Pop that in between the group input and the group output. And the reason why we're going for a volume is because we want to convert the volume of this object into points, because we want the asteroids to appear inside the cube and not on the surface of the cube. Now I can hit Shift A, I'm going to go to Point, and we'll choose Distribute Points in Volume. I'll pop that in between the Mesh to Volume and the group output. As you can see, it's generated points in the volume. Excellent. Shift A, go to Instance, and we go Instance on Points. And the instance we want to place on the points would be our asteroid. So I'm going to unmute the asteroid collection. I'll then drag this asteroid collection into the geometry nodes window. I'll just mute the asteroids. I'll then drag the instances socket from the collection info to the instance socket on the instance on points. I'm going to choose pick random, and on the collection info we'll enable separate children and reset children. Obviously we need to reduce the scale on the X, Y and Z on the instance on points, but I want to scale them with a random value so they're not all the same size. So I'm just going to box select these nodes here. I'm going to hit G, just bring these up to around about there. Bring the collection info up to here. I'll then hit Shift A. I'm going to go to Utilities, and we're going to choose Random Value. And I'll plug the value from the random value into the scale socket of the instance on points. I'll increase the minimum size to 0.05 and the max size to 0.15. I'll then navigate to my distribute points in volume. I'm going to increase the density to, let's say, 25. Okay, it's generated loads of empty objects. So if we go to our asteroid collection here, enable that, expand the asteroid collection, and then go to displace empty. I'll hit M for move, and I'm going to move it to the scene collection. We can then mute the asteroid collection. Excellent. So they're sharing all the same rotation, and we want to randomize the rotation for all of these. So I'm going to take this random value, I'm going to drag it down here, I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate, and I'll drag it up to here. I'll then plug the result from this random value into the rotation, and for the minimum value I'm going to type in negative TAU, and for the maximum value I'm going to type in TAU. And what TAU is tau, and tau is a mathematical expression for 360 degrees in radians approximately. So it's basically negative 360 degrees and maximum 360 degrees. So all of these are rotated in between these two factors here. The next thing we need to do is we want these to rotate over time, not too fast, but just a subtle movement. So in order to do that, I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go to Instances, and we'll choose Rotate Instances. And I'm going to pop that in between the instance on points and the group output. And we need to rotate the rotation options here. But instead of adding keyframes, I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to go to Input. We'll go to Scene, and we'll choose Scene Time. I'll then take the second socket from the scene time into the rotation of the rotate instances. Whenever I hit play, you can see all these are rotating. but I want to control the speed, so I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to go to Utilities. I'm going to choose Math, and we'll choose Math. I'll then pop that in between the scene time and the rotate instances node. I'm going to change it from add to divide. Maybe I'll start off dividing it by, let's say, 10. Let's see what that does. I hit play. Okay, they've slowed down quite a bit. Excellent. I'll just navigate over to my modifiers panel over here, so make sure your spanner's selected. And we're just going to connect up some of these sockets. I'm going to connect this density socket into the group input, and as you can see, the density values have now popped up in our modifier. I'm also going to take the seed value and plug that into the bottom socket of the group input. So now we've got a seed, we can change the seed on the fly. And I'll also take the top socket from the collection info into the bottom socket of the group input. And that means in the future, you can change your collection to whatever you want. So I'll just click this button, I'll click asteroids. Maybe we can also drag the value from this divide node into the bottom socket, and then we can also change the speed on the fly. If you want to rename any of these labels in your geometry node editor, hit N to open up the N panel. I'm going to click group, and this is the list of exposed values. So with this bottom value, I'm going to double click this, and I'm going to rename this to rotation speed, and as you can see, it's changed it there. You can also choose your maximum and minimum values. So for the density, I'm going to set a maximum density of 50 because I don't want to be able to drag this to infinity because that could crash Blender. So if I drag this all the way over to 50, that's more than enough. We're not going to use that many. I'm just going to change this back to 25. Okay, we've finished with the geometry nodes editor now. I'll just hit N to close the N panel. I'm going to take my cursor to the 3D viewport. I'll navigate to the bottom left until I see the crosshair. I'm going to left click and drag down and release. That will collapse that window. I'll go to my outliner and re-enable the spacecraft collection. As you can see, the asteroids are way too small, so I'm going to hit S10, scale it up by 10, maybe S2, scale it up another 2, maybe S2, and I'm just going to keep doing this until I'm kind of happy with the scaling. Maybe I'll hit S2, increase it a bit more. I'm just going to go into viewport shading, maybe one more time, S2. Okay. I'll be happy with that. I'll then hold down Control and numpad 3, and that will face the 3D viewport head on onto my spaceship. And I'm going to click the seed button. I'm going to keep clicking this until no asteroids are in collision with the spaceship. So essentially, the spaceship can travel through here without colliding with any asteroids. I'll just hit Control, numpad 3, G. I'll just drag this across just to make sure that I've got plenty of space in the middle. Excellent. I'm going to hit numpad 7 to go into top view. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate. I'm going to hold down X and hold down Control, snap it to the grid till around about there. I'll then hit Control numpad 3. I'm going to change the seed. So we've got a different seed, but again, we don't want any collisions with the spaceship. Maybe I'll reduce the density slightly. Maybe I'll hit G. Just bring these out to maybe around about there. Okay. I'll then hit numpad 7 to go into top view. I'm going to hold down Shift and left click select this asteroid field. I'm going to hit Shift D, Y, hold down Control, snap it to the grid till around about there. Maybe hit G, just offset them slightly, just so they look a bit random. I'll then hit numpad 1. I'm going to hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. So we're definitely going to have to move our camera. Maybe I'll hit numpad 7. I'm going to hold down Shift, left click select all the asteroid fields. I'm going to hit G, X, just drag these forward a bit to round about there perhaps. Okay, I hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. Let's just push play, see what we've got. Okay, looking good so far. We'll select the spacecraft empty object. So that's the empty object that controls your spaceship. And on frame 1, on the X location I believe. Yep, on the X location, add a keyframe. And then on your X location over here, I'm going to bring my spacecraft on the negative axis by, let's say, negative 100 meters. I then add another keyframe. I'll take my cursor to my timeline down here. I'm going to hit T and then I'm going to choose linear. So now if I hit play, we should have a consistent speed. Excellent. Now we want our camera to track the spaceship. So if you remember, in your spacecraft collection, the empty object that's controlling your spacecraft was called empty controller. So I'm going to select my camera. I'm going to go to constraints. I'll then click add constraint and we're going to choose damped track. And for the target object, we'll choose that empty controller. If your camera goes all wacky, don't worry. Just select some of these. It's probably negative Y or negative Z. There we go. And now if I push play, you can see the camera is tracking the spaceship. Excellent. Maybe I want the camera to be a bit further away. So with the camera selected, I'm going to go to my object data over here. And on the Y location, I'm just going to drag this back to round about there, maybe drag it on the X-axis to round about there. I'm just going to tweak this until I've got everything in frame. Okay, I'll then hit play. Just see what we've got. I'm not so happy with the M frame. I don't want it going behind an asteroid at the end. I'd rather it start off so it's hiding behind an asteroid, and then as you push play it starts emerging from behind the asteroid belt. So I'm going to change the position of my camera to maybe something around about there. Then I hit play. Let's just make sure that I've got everything in frame. No, it's still going behind. Okay, let's see if we can tweak this a bit. So I'm going to drag it down on the Z-axis. Maybe something around there. Let's see what that does. This is quite annoying. Let's just drag it down on the Z-axis a bit more. I'm just going to skip to the last frame. I'm going to see if I can get around this. I'm going to have to change the seed value of this asteroid field here. So I'm going to hit Control, numpad 3 to go into front view. I'm going to go to my modifiers over here. I'm going to change the seed until there's no intersection. Maybe I'll have to reduce the density slightly. Change the seed again. Okay, that's looking a bit better. I'll just hit G. Just drag this up to around about there. I'm going to hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. Just skip to frame 1. I'll select my camera. I'm going to bring it down on the Z-axis. I'm going to hit play. Just to see what we've got. I'm going to pass behind that one. And cut through. Okay, I'm kind of a bit more happy with that one. There's not much going on in the background, so let me just select. I'll just select this asteroid field. I'm going to hit numpad 0, and I'm going to change the seed value just so this gap is filled a bit more. Maybe something around there. I'm not sure if my camera's culling or not, so I'm going to select my camera. I'm going to go to my camera data over here, and I'm going to increase the end point to, let's say, 5,000 meters. Usually, if you set your end value to a high number, it's always sensible to set your clip start to, let's say, 1 meter. So I'm just going to skip to the first frame. I'm going to hit play. I'm still not really happy with this, so I'll select this asteroid here. I'm going to go to my modifiers over here. I'm going to hit Control, numpad 3. It's just a case of keep tweaking these until you've got something that you like. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'll just hit G, just ensure that it's not going to intersect with the ship. I hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. I still want the ship to appear from behind an asteroid, and it's not doing that at the moment. It's going into the asteroid, so I'm going to hit Control, numpad 3 to go into front facing view. I'll keep changing the seed until I've got something that I like. This one might work. I hit G, just bring this across, hit numpad 0. No, that's still not working. Control, numpad 3. It's a bit of a pain getting something that you like, but you know, it's worth sticking with it until you've got something suitable. Hit numpad 0. That's looking a bit better. I'll just disable my overlays. I'm going to hit play. No, it's going to hide behind this one towards the end. That's no good. I mean, it depends what you're going for. So I'm just going to keep tweaking this until I've got something that I'm happy with. Okay, I've got something that I like here. Watch this foreground asteroid here. It's like it's rotating and pointing towards the ship, so it's almost like pushing it, so it's guiding the eye in that direction. The only thing is it slightly clips at the end here, but I can live with that, so I'm actually quite happy with that. I'm just going to check my front view. Okay, I'm happy with that. I'm just going to tweak the camera slightly more. So I'm going to enable my overlays. I'm going to select my camera, and I'm going to drag it on the X-axis. So around about there. And maybe I'll drag it down on the Z-axis, just so I've only got a tiny bit of the tail end of the ship poking through. I'll just hit play, just to double check that. Yep, I'm happy with that. I'm going to go into rendered view, just to check out my lighting. If I go to output, and I'm going to choose render region, and that will only render out what's in the camera view. I'll disable my overlays. I think I'm going to adjust the lighting, so I'm going to increase my outliner over here. I'm going to go to my asteroid field generators, and I'm going to mute those from the scene, just so it's just the sun lamps and the spaceship. I'm going to mute the bottom sun lamp, which was the bottom lamp. I'm going to choose the sun lamp. I'll then navigate to my object data over here. I'm just going to tweak the rotation on the X, Y and Z. So maybe I'm going to set the X rotation to 0, and I'll bring it on the Y rotation to, let's say, negative 75 degrees, maybe negative 80. And I'll decrease the Z rotation I just want the rim of this loading bay to be highlighted, just to get a basic idea of the form of the ship. Maybe just a tiny streak going across here as well. Okay, let's just re-enable our astrofield generators. To where we've scaled these asteroids up, I think we're going to have to increase the bump mapping. So I'm going to take my cursor to the bottom left until I see a crosshair. I'm going to left click and drag, and we'll bring this up, open up a new window. We'll change this from 3D viewport to shader editor. I'll then enable the asteroid collection. I'm going to select an asteroid. I'm going to zoom in into my bump node over here, and I'm going to change the distance to 5. There we go. The bump's coming through a lot more now. I'll then go to my outliner and mute the asteroid collection. I think to give this one more level of detail is I'm going to select my camera in my outliner. I'm going to go to my camera data down here. I'll enable depth of field. And if you remember, our ship was controlled by the empty controller. So for the focus object on depth of field, I'm going to choose empty controller. I'm going to change the blades all the way to 16. And I'm going to give an f-stop of, let's say, 0.7. So it's quite a heavy depth of field. I'll go to my render settings over here. You should have your render settings set up from last time. I'm going to go to viewport shading. I'm going to go file, save as, and I've got mine saved as like and subscribe. Thanks folks, you absolute legends. I'll then hit F12 just to render out a preview. Okay, I can see already I haven't got enough depth of field. You don't want to go too high with it because it'll kind of make it look like a miniature. But for an artistic approach, I'm going to go for more depth of field. So I'm going to escape that and cancel that render. I'll go to my camera tab down here and I'm going to increase the depth of field to 0.3. We could also add motion blur to this. So I'm going to go to my render tab over here. Actually, before we do that, I'm going to go to my output. And you can see I'm running at 30 frames per second, and the correct formula for motion blur for a frame rate of 30 frames per second is we go down to motion blur down here, enable motion blur, and you remember we was at 30 frames per second, so we need a shutter speed of 0.6. So the shutter speed is always double the frame rate. So if you're running a frame rate of 25 frames per second, you want a shutter speed of 50 frames per second. So I've got my motion blur set up, I've got my depth of field set up. To speed up render times, I'm going to increase my noise threshold to 0.025, and I'm going to give max samples of, let's say, 1024, just for a preview. I'll then hit F12. Okay, it's not looking too shabby, but we have got the compositing effects over the top from the previous tutorial, so we're just going to adjust that now. So I'm going to hit Escape to close that window. I'm going to go to my compositing tab at the top over here. I'll focus on the lens distortion. I'll reduce the lens distortion to negative 0.01 and the dispersion to 0.01. I'm going to reduce it a bit more. So for the distortion, I'm going to type in negative 0.001 and the dispersion to 0.0025. Just so it only slightly affects the image. I'm going to reduce the mix on my glare node to negative 0.951. I just want a hint of glare. I'll keep my soften filter as it is. Maybe we can add a vignette to this, just so the eye is focused on the center. So I'm going to select these nodes here. I'm going to hit G, just drag these across over to here. I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go to mask and we'll choose box mask. With the box mask selected, I'm going to increase the X to maybe around about there perhaps. And I'll increase the Y. I'm holding down Shift while dragging these values to drag them in finer increments to around about there. I'll then hit Shift A, we'll go to color. We'll choose mix and we'll choose mix color. I'll then plug the box mask into the factor, and for the top color of this color mix node, I'm going to change to black. I'll then plug the image from the soften node into the bottom socket of the mix color, and I'll plug the image socket from the mix color into this noodle here, which goes into the composite node and the viewer node. As you can see, we've got a black border around the outside. So now we just need to blur that. So I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go to filter, we'll choose blur, and we'll go for blur. I'll pop that in between the box mask and the mix color node. I'm going to change it from Gaussian to fast Gaussian. I'm going to enable relative, and let's say we'll give it a value of 5% for now. See what that does, maybe a bit more. So I'm going to go for 25%. So this is without and this is with. It's just a subtle difference. I'm just neaten these nodes up. So that's our final image. I'll go back to my layout tab over here. I'll just give you a little tip quick. So I'm going to go to my outliner. I'm going to mute my asteroid generators over here. I'll then re-enable my overlays. I'll select this discombobulated mesh. I'm going to go to UV editing. I'm going to change this image from this displacement image. I'm going to change it to one of these ones. Let's say this top one. I'll enable my overlays in this screen. I'm going to go to viewport shading. So say you've got a panel and you don't like the detail on it. I'm going to hit number 3 for face select. I'll select this face. You just go to your image editor and you hit G and you drag it to a location of your choice. So I've done that on all the rims of these engine ports over here. So as you can see, there's no black on any of these, and that's because I selected these panels. I then dragged it into a place where there was no black. Just hit G, just drag this up to around about there. So it's really easy to customize your spacecraft to get it the way you want it. I'm just going to tab out of edit mode. I'm going to go back to my layout. I'll just re-enable this sun quick. So if you find that it's rendering quite slow, just re-enable your asteroids. Over here, I'm going to hit numpad period to zoom into those objects. And if you remember, on your modifiers, we've got the subdivision surface set to 5. So you can reduce this down to 3 for each of these if you want. I'm going to keep mine set to 5. By reducing the subdivision surface, that will significantly reduce your render times. Also, on your render tab over here, let me just disable my asteroid collection, and I'll re-enable my asteroid field generators. So on your render settings over here, so for denoising on your render, the higher the noise threshold, the quicker your frames will render, but it will result in lower quality. And the lower this number, the higher the quality, but the longer it takes to render. So I'm going to set my max samples to 1024 times 4, which is 1496, and I'm going to set my noise threshold to 0.01. For my render output, you can save yours as a PNG, which is lossless. I want increased dynamic range because I'm going to bring this into DaVinci Resolve and color grade it. I'm going to save my file format as an OpenEXR, and I'm going to have a codec of DWAA lossy. I'll also go to my render settings over here. I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom. I'm going to go to color management, and I've got my view transform set to AGX. You can set yours to filmic or whatever you like. All you have to do is hit Ctrl F12 and that will render out your image sequence. That's the tutorial in a nutshell. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please click like and subscribe. It really helps my channel. Have a great day, level up, and thanks for watching.